Okay, hi. So today I will be discussing the two different strategies, verb action and checking for understanding. So I'll give you a brief description and explanation of the strategies as well as ways for you to implement them in your own classroom. So first, we're going to talk about verb actions. Verb actions is teaching irregular verbs through actions. Research has shown that acting out new words for a child's vocabulary is excellent practice, as well as helps the students remember in their own way the word that they had just learned or the way that it can be used. Teachers can identify words that the students are having difficulty on by observing the students' written work as well as orally in the classroom with their peers. From a teacher's observation, they can plan experiences to support the correct usage. A common misconception is when students overgeneralize irregular words as well as adding ed to the end of a verb. For example, if we were talking about how Austin just ate, we wouldn't say that Austin just eated because the verb is to eat, but they just wanted to add an ed. So that is obviously not correct. For ELLs, this is also true, so when teachers see this, they can give examples to help the students grasp the word as well as the way that it should be used. For verb action strategy, there's 8 steps that need to be followed. The first one is observe students and monitor written work to identify verbs that are being misused. This can be done by an observation log where you can note the verbs and other vocabulary that your students are misusing. 2, you can plan active experiences to practice the correct usage of identified words. So this can be done by observing your students and as you notice repeated misuse of verbs, plan a lesson that includes physical action to be performed by the students. Document the activity by taking photos of the students' work daily to keep them accountable. 4, involve students in contributing to an irregular verb journal. This can be done by having your students complete an irregular verb journal where they write the experience that they participated in and providing a repeated use of the verb in the journal. That way they can just keep track of all the verbs that they've been using and which ones they are still needing help on. You as a teacher can create a chart or a word wall or a bulletin board to provide a resource for students. So instead of just a normal word wall, it'd be a regular verb wall. So you can create a word wall documenting the irregular verbs studied. And you can also post photographs next to the word to show what activity is being done in the verb. 6, you can continue to observe student and oral written usage to determine when reteaching or review is necessary. So this can be done by continuing to document your observations of verb and new vocabulary usage to help determine the effectiveness of your lesson. 7, you can evaluate your approaches in the learning that takes place. So you can use a self-evaluation rubric. There's one in the book that we were given, but you can also just use this rubric to evaluate your planning as well as your implementation of your verb activities. And then you can also plan new activities and add to your lesson in order to reach higher expectations for your students. And then 8, you can continue to observe and identify new verbs and other vocabulary to teach. This can be done by continuing to observe and document your students' verb and vocabulary usage and plan lessons based on the verbs that they still find challenging. So let's just say that you're noticing that your students are having a hard time with the verbs like throw and catch. So an implementation that could be used is to first write the words so they can see what they look like and how they're different, and then show the words that the action is already being completed. So for example, I'm going to throw the tennis ball, but I already threw the tennis ball, and then I'm going to catch the softball, but I already caught the softball. So you can then have your students toss a small ball in pairs. And then if you're throwing the ball, you can say I threw the ball. And then if someone's catching it, they can say I caught the ball, so they can understand the difference between those action verbs. You would then have them start a journal to keep track of the words that they've gone over and what words still give them trouble, like I mentioned earlier, in order to make writing and verbal connections between the action verbs. And then for differentiation in the classroom, you could have the students, if they seem to be struggling with words, have them write more words in their journal. And then if they're not having much difficulty, then just have them write less verbs. It'll basically depend how many verbs they write, is just their difficulty of like their understanding. So my next strategy is checking for understanding. Checking for understanding is using questioning strategies to differentiate instruction. So when giving instruction to students, it's important to identify what the student already knows, as well as different ways to clarify things that are misunderstood before moving forward in the lesson. For all students, including our ELLs, it's important to check and make sure your students are comprehending the materials by checking for understanding, by effective questioning, and observing your students as well. For ELLs, it's extremely important to understand their level of proficiency in order to help and support your student with being successful in their own comprehension and like what level they can comprehend things. And then research shows that many different things when it comes to checking for understanding, questioning, come into play, such as many times students use a non-response, like they just stay quiet, as they think it's the correct response. So the student thinks that by not responding that they are in a way responding. Also, students might not understand the information but don't know how to communicate that they do not understand. So therefore, like, no response is the best response for them, because this just goes to prove that that you as a teacher need to know their proficiency level to see like where they fall, whether they understand or like why they're being quiet or what they are thinking. So another thing is disconnected phrases, is that this is another sign that your student does not fully comprehend the material or questions being asked. This shows that the student needs further clarification on what is needed from them or what you're looking for. So as I was reading, research has identified successful approaches to checking for understanding. Questions that actively support both student understanding and teacher knowledge and recognition of the instructional needs. So you need to know like what the student needs to know and understand how the student would interpret it. So there's a step-by-step process for this strategy as well to keep your students' comprehension, and how you as a teacher can check for your students' understanding. So the first one is teachers can plan the format of your questions ahead of time. So like in all of our lesson plans, we are always wanting to, talk about what comprehension questions we'd ask, kind of lay out the questions throughout the lesson as well. So this research shows that questions formatted with specific goals in mind are more likely to elicit a response from our students. Number 2 is teachers can plan everyone responds activities. So everyone responds in the book is called ER. Everyone responds activities in order to encourage participation. So students who respond non-verbally to demonstrate their understanding or non-understanding in a non-threatening manner are much more likely to provide information to identify the causes of confusion or the need for clarification. Number 3 is maintain visual contact with learners. It's important to watch the faces and movements of your students when you ask checking for understanding questions. They may become like fidgety or eyes are wandering, just so you won't call on them because they're unsure of what the question is or what the answer should be. 4 is provide adequate wait time. It's important to pause after asking a question to help ensure that the student has enough time, or that all the students have enough time to process their answer. But it's also important that your students also give their peers adequate enough time to answer, because I know in my class there are students who are thinking the question, but then another student will just blurt it out, so then that doesn't really give them time to fully process and give their answer because they've been thought out by like another person. So just provide adequate wait time across the board. Number 5 is be aware of your body language. A teacher's body language can encourage or discourage a student's participation, so just be really aware of that. And then 6, reward students for asking questions to provide incentive for participation. So teachers who provide positive verbal encouragement will oftentimes encourage more students to answer and participate. I know when I was growing up, I would always want like a teacher to be like, good job, great thinking, like way to really work for that. So that always gave me a boost to incorporate and like participate. 7 is continue to monitor both student understanding and your use of questioning strategies. When your questioning strategies provide you with information about students who need reteaching, then keep track of the information in order to build your future lessons. So you can just, keep track of every student, and if you need to reteach certain things, you can in small group or in full group, large group. 8 is teach mini lessons to demonstrate using questions to form responses as you notice who is responding and who is not. You can make note of the students who are not responding and then probably pull them aside for like a small group to guide them on how to respond, or just kind of talk with them as to why they're not responding, or if you're missing something and y'all aren't on the same page, that's a good way to encourage them to participate. And then lastly, adapt lessons based on students' English language development levels. Beware of the proficiency level of your ELLs and keep track as they move from level to level. As you plan questions and strategies for checking for understanding, adapt the strategies according to the level of your students. So, checking for understanding can be implemented in the classroom by an activity as simple as show me cards in a lesson, that where the teacher would ask questions and the students would have to respond by visual cards that they were given. So these can be different colors or different shapes, but they would simply symbolize true or false or yes or no, and they can be made in order to encourage all students to participate and respond to checking for understanding, where they would just give a complete like blank answer rather than having to come up with it themselves. So it checks for understanding and encourages participation. So that's about it. Thanks for learning about verb action and checking for understanding strategies in the class.